My brother spent years making everyone believe I was jealous of his success. The truth was so much darker. Update included at the bottom. I need to get this off my chest because I've been holding this in for so long. And honestly, the recent turn of events has validated everything I tried to tell people 3 years ago. My name's Marcus, I'm 34 now, and my brother Chad is 36. We grew up in a pretty normal middle-class household with loving parents. Our dad's a high school principal, our mom's a nurse. Nothing fancy, but stable. We were taught the value of hard work and honest living. That's what makes what happened between me and Chad so frustrating, because he clearly learned a very different lesson somewhere along the way. The golden boy era begins. Chad was always the charmer, while I was the quiet, thoughtful brother who enjoyed reading and eventually became a systems analyst. Chad was the guy who could talk to literally anyone. He could make you laugh within 30 seconds of meeting him. He had a golden retriever personality. Everyone just naturally liked him. That wasn't ever a problem for me. I was genuinely proud of my brother. We'd grab beers, talk about our lives, and I felt like we had a solid relationship despite being pretty different people. Then, about 6 years ago, Chad decided he was going to be an entrepreneur. First, it was just talk. Everyone has business ideas, right? But Chad was serious. He was going to start a luxury lifestyle concierge service, basically helping wealthy people manage their schedules, plan vacations, handle their personal errands, that kind of thing. It actually wasn't a bad idea. There's definitely a market for that. I encouraged him. Our parents encouraged him. We all thought it was cool that he was taking a risk. What I didn't realize was what he was actually doing to launch this business. The sudden success. Within maybe 8 months of starting his company, let's call it Lifestyle Plus, Chad was living large. And I mean large. He bought a brand new $85,000 Range Rover. He signed a lease on a gorgeous downtown loft that cost $3,200 a month. He was taking clients to expensive restaurants. He started wearing designer clothes, going on weekend trips to Vegas and Miami. He was constantly posting on Instagram and Facebook about his amazing life, his incredible clients, his business milestones. It was a lot very quickly. I remember asking him about it one day when we grabbed lunch. I wasn't being judgmental. I was genuinely curious and, if I'm being honest, a little confused. I asked him how the business was scaling so fast, how he was affording all this on startup revenue. I remember the exact conversation because it was the moment things started to shift between us. He got defensive. Not defensively honest, defensively in the way someone does when they're hiding something. He said something like, "Oh, so now you're questioning my success? That's typical. You always do this." I said, "I'm not questioning anything, man. I'm just curious about your business model." He said, "Not everyone needs to bootstrap their business like some kind of martyr, Marcus. Some people know how to leverage resources and take calculated risks. I'm sorry if that makes you uncomfortable." That was the first red flag. Not just the dismissal, but the way he framed it, like my question was about jealousy, not finance. The jealousy narrative begins. From that lunch forward, Chad started telling people that I was jealous of his success. I didn't realize this was happening at first. But then our mom mentioned it one day. She called me and said, "Chad told me you seemed upset about his business doing so well. Honey, we're proud of both of you." I was confused and tried to explain that wasn't the case at all. But I could tell she didn't fully believe me. The seed had been planted. Then at a family dinner, my parents, Chad, his girlfriend Kelly at the time, me, and my wife Jennifer, Chad made it into a whole thing. He was talking about landing some new high-profile client. He was always vague about specifics, which now I understand why. And he said something like, "This is going to be huge for Lifestyle Plus. I know some people think it's crazy how fast I'm growing, but that's just because they don't understand entrepreneurship the same way I do." He looked directly at me when he said it. I didn't even take the bait. I literally just said, "That's great, man. Congratulations." But the damage was done. My parents exchanged that look. The one where they think you're being fake supportive to cover up jealousy. Over the next year, Chad weaponized this narrative brilliantly. Every time I said literally anything about his business, genuine questions, concerns, observations, he'd reframe it as jealousy. It became a shield. A perfect shield, because who wants to look like the bitter, jealous sibling? So everyone just believed him. Or at least, everyone started to assume that any criticism I had was probably rooted in jealousy rather than legitimate concern. Our parents started being weird around me, not outright cold, but there was definitely this underlying current of, poor Chad, his brother can't celebrate his success. My wife Jennifer noticed it too and actually confronted my mom about it once. My mom denied it, but not convincingly, and Chad just kept living his increasingly lavish lifestyle, unchecked, with everyone believing that any skepticism I expressed was just me being a bitter brother. Why I couldn't keep quiet, even though I tried. Here's the thing that nobody understood. I wasn't questioning Chad because I was jealous. I was questioning him because the math didn't add up, and I work in systems analysis. I understand financial flows. I understand what's sustainable and what isn't. A startup concierge service, even a good one, doesn't generate the kind of revenue that would support a Range Rover, a $3,200 apartment, Rolex watches, constant traveling, and $500 plus dinners within 8 months. That's not how business works. There's a runway period. There's overhead. There's slow growth. I've worked with enough startups to know this. So yeah, I was concerned. Not jealous, concerned. There's a difference. I tried talking to him privately multiple times. I'd say things like, "Hey man, your lifestyle spending seems high relative to what I assume your revenue is. Have you thought about reinvesting instead of pulling out for personal use?" And he'd respond with something like, "I appreciate the concern, Dad." In this mocking way that made it clear he thought I was being paternal and judgmental rather than pragmatic. Finally, about 3 years ago, I just stopped asking. Not because I was satisfied with his answers, but because I realized every time I showed concern, he was using it to paint me as jealous. And honestly, I was tired of being cast as the bitter brother at family events. I figured, you know what? If he's making bad decisions, that's on him. He's an adult. I'll learn about the crash when it happens. I just never expected the crash to involve him lying about it for this long. For about 3 more years, Chad maintained this image. The Instagram posts continued. The designer clothes, the vacation photos, new car leases. He changed cars constantly. Another red flag I kept quiet about. He kept up appearances at family events like everything was thriving. And nobody questioned it. Because who questions a success story? And more importantly, who wanted to validate the jealous brother narrative by expressing doubt? My parents definitely didn't want to. They were so proud of Chad, so excited to tell people what he was doing. They'd brag about him at their friends' dinner parties. Our mom had literally started introducing him as my son, the entrepreneur, to literally everyone she met. I watched all this happen and basically kept my head down. Jennifer and I just lived our lives. I made decent money as a systems analyst, 6 figures with bonuses, but I didn't have the lifestyle Chad had. We have a nice house in the suburbs, reliable cars, we save money, we plan ahead. We're boring, but we're secure. I was content with that, even if it made me look like the unsuccessful brother by comparison. Then, about 4 months ago, everything started to crack. The collapse started when Chad didn't show up to our dad's 65th birthday party. Like, didn't show up, didn't call, nothing. My dad was hurt. Chad finally texted him the next day saying his car was in the shop, and he couldn't find a ride. This was the guy who was constantly flying to different cities. The excuse made no sense. Then Chad didn't show up to Thanksgiving and Christmas. He was vague about why. Said he was dealing with some business stuff. Our mom was beside herself with worry. Then in early January, my mom called me, and her voice was strained in a way I hadn't heard before. She said, "Marcus, have you talked to Chad? Something's wrong. He's not answering his phone. He finally texted your dad and said he's taking some time to himself, but he sounds off." I hadn't talked to Chad in months, honestly. We didn't have a bad relationship anymore, but we just didn't have much of a relationship at all after the years of the jealousy narrative. I told my mom I'd try to reach out. Chad's response to my text was cryptic. He said, "Hey man, yeah, going through something right now. Can't really get into it. Just need some space." I called him and he actually answered, which surprised me. He sounded exhausted, defeated, like someone had let all the air out of him. I asked what was going on. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he said, "I fucked up, Marcus. I really fucked up." That's when I knew. The truth comes out. Chad didn't want to tell me everything over the phone. He asked if I could come over to the apartment, which, by the way, I hadn't been invited to in over a year. When I got there, I barely recognized him. He looked like he'd lost 20 pounds. His hair was longer and unkempt, and there were empty food containers and energy drink cans everywhere. The pristine, Instagram-perfect loft was a disaster. He told me everything. From the beginning, Lifestyle Plus had never actually been profitable. Like, not even close. The business model was sound, but the execution was terrible, and his pricing was too low for his market. He'd never actually obtained a sustainable client base. He had a handful of people who'd used his services once or twice, but no recurring revenue to speak of. So he did what a lot of desperate people do. He started lying about it. He took out personal loans. Multiple of them. Credit cards, we're talking like $150,000 across various cards. He took a loan against his car, which he no longer owned. It had been repossessed 2 months ago, and he'd been using a rental or borrowing his girlfriend's car to keep up appearances. He even borrowed money from his ex-girlfriend Sophia, telling her it was a business loan that would generate returns, and she never saw a dime of it. The Range Rover? Lease fraud. The apartment? He'd gotten behind on rent. His landlord was in the process of evicting him, and that's why he suddenly needed space. The designer clothes were from high-interest credit cards. The vacations and dinners were all funded by new debt. He told me that about 6 months ago, he realized the whole thing was unsustainable. He'd been playing financial Jenga, taking out new loans to pay old ones, and one day the whole tower was just going to collapse. He'd managed to hide it for as long as he could, but the creditors were now calling constantly. He'd been served notice of eviction. Multiple credit card companies were threatening legal action. And the worst part? He knew this was coming. For years, he'd known this was unsustainable, and he'd known he was lying to everyone about how successful he was. But he couldn't stop because stopping meant admitting the truth. So he just kept going deeper and deeper into debt while publicly maintaining this fiction. I asked him why he did it, why he let everyone believe it, why he built such an elaborate lie. He said, "Because I needed everyone to think I was successful. I needed you all to believe in me. And once I started lying, I couldn't stop because if I admitted the truth, I'd be proving I was a failure." I almost felt bad for him in that moment. Almost. Then I said, "You know this is going to come out, right? This isn't something you can hide from." He said, "I know. That's why I'm telling people now. I'm going to file for bankruptcy. I've been talking to a lawyer. It's going to be bad." And then he said something that made all of my sympathy evaporate. "But at least now you can be right about being jealous. Everyone's probably going to think you called the shots on this somehow, or that you're enjoying watching me fail." And I realized that even in the midst of his complete financial implosion, even while admitting to years of fraud and deception, Chad's first instinct was still to manipulate the narrative. The public collapse. I didn't tell him, but I knew his secret wouldn't stay a secret for long. Bankruptcy is a matter of public record, and a 6-figure debt isn't something you hide quietly. About a week later, one of his former clients, who he'd never actually properly served, by the way, had apparently done some digging trying to figure out why Chad had never completed the work he'd been hired for. This client found the bankruptcy filing online and posted about it on social media, essentially calling Chad a fraud. Within 24 hours, it blew up. The posts were everywhere. Screenshots of Chad's Instagram photos and captions about his thriving business, juxtaposed with the reality of the bankruptcy filing. People he'd supposedly served came forward saying they'd never received any actual services. The woman he'd borrowed money from, his ex, Sophia, went public about the loan he'd never repaid. Other creditors started joining in, sharing their own stories. The local news picked it up. Local entrepreneur allegedly ran Ponzi-like scheme. I'm not even sure it technically qualified as a Ponzi scheme, but that's how the news framed it. Our parents found out the way everyone else did, through social media and news articles. I'll never forget my mom calling me, her voice shaking. "Marcus, is this true? Is your brother really? Is he really a con artist?" That was a rough conversation. The reckoning. Here's where it gets interesting and why I'm writing this now. After everything came out, suddenly everyone remembered something interesting. I had been expressing concerns about Chad's spending and business model for years. Not jealously, competently, with actual valid points about sustainability and revenue models. My mom called me and actually apologized. She said, "Honey, I'm so sorry. You were never jealous. You were the only one thinking clearly about this the whole time, and we didn't listen to you because your brother made us think you were being bitter." Our dad said something similar, though he was less comfortable with the emotional side of it. He basically said, "You were right about the financial projections. The worst part? A lot of people in our extended family and social circles suddenly started reaching out to me, saying things like, 'I always thought you seemed too smart to be that jealous.' Or, 'Looking back, your concerns about his spending made sense.' Nobody was saying, 'I believed the false narrative about you being a jealous person and I should apologize for that.' They were just quietly shifting their opinion. But you know what the most infuriating part is? Chad, while admitting to the fraud and the debt, has never actually acknowledged that he spent years gaslighting me and making everyone believe I was the problem. In his bankruptcy case, in the few public statements he's made, he's been vague about his motivations. He's positioned himself as a guy who got in over his head and made mistakes, not as someone who intentionally manipulated his family and lied to everyone. And some people are actually buying that narrative too. The fallout, current situation. Chad moved back in with our parents about 2 months ago. His apartment situation was obviously resolved by eviction. He's working through bankruptcy, and our parents are helping him pay for the bankruptcy lawyer. There's this weird dynamic now where my parents are simultaneously supporting him and also kind of disappointed, but still showing up for him because he's their son. I don't blame them for that. Parents should support their kids. But it does sting that the narrative is just shifting into Chad had a hard time and we're supporting him through it, rather than Chad lied to us, damaged his reputation intentionally through deception, and manipulated our son's character. Jennifer thinks I need to just let it go. She says, "You were right. Everyone knows you were right now. Does it matter if they fully understand how much he lied to you?" But it does matter to me, because I spent 3 years being perceived as a jealous, bitter brother at family events. I spent 3 years of my one and only sibling relationship strained by his deliberate manipulation. My relationship with my parents suffered because of his lies about my motivations. That was real damage, and it doesn't just disappear because the public fraud came out. What really gets me is that I could have just let him hang. I could have smiled and nodded while he dug himself into a deeper financial hole. I could have enjoyed being right about it later. But I didn't, because that's not the kind of person I am. I tried to help and he weaponized my concern. And now he's dealing with the legal and financial consequences. Sure, but he gets to be the guy who made a mistake, while I got to be the jealous brother for 3 years. That doesn't feel balanced. The weird silver lining? The one good thing that's come from this, I actually have a clearer picture of who my family is and what they value. My parents aren't bad people, but they tend to believe what's convenient to believe. They loved the narrative that Chad was a success because it reflected well on them as parents. And they were initially willing to believe I was jealous because that made them feel good about supporting Chad. Jennifer and I have gotten closer, which is good. She was the only one in my corner the whole time, even when it felt like everyone else was buying the narrative. And honestly, I've stopped caring so much about people's perception of me. If I'd been more worried about that before, maybe I would have just gone along with the lie instead of asking legitimate questions about Chad's finances. But I wanted to write this down because I needed people to understand. It's not just about the fraud. The fraud is the obvious part. The insidious part is how he used the narrative of my jealousy to protect himself and damage my character in the process. That's the part that still bothers me. Update. So this got a lot of responses, and honestly, a lot of you were asking what happens next. I wanted to give an update while it's still fresh. I reread a lot of the comments, and a lot of people were right. I should probably try to have an actual conversation with Chad about this. Not to let it go, but to actually address it and maybe understand his perspective better. 2 weeks ago, I reached out and asked if Chad wanted to get coffee. He agreed, which surprised me. We met at a coffee shop about halfway between where we both live. He looked better than he did when I visited the apartment. Not good, but better. Like he was at least showering and sleeping regularly again. We got coffee and sat down, and there was this awkward silence for a solid 30 seconds. I opened with, "I need to talk about the elephant in the room. Not the bankruptcy. The fact that you spent 3 years telling everyone I was jealous of your success when your success was literally built on fraud." He got quiet, really quiet, like he stared at his coffee for a solid minute. Then he said, "I know I did that, and I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry, Marcus." I said, "Saying you're sorry isn't really enough when you spent years actively lying about my motivations to everyone who mattered to me." He said, "I know, you're right. I don't really know how to fix that." And honestly, in that moment, I realized something. He actually genuinely didn't know. Not because he was being manipulative, or at least not just because of that, but because Chad has spent so long living in this narrative he created that he probably doesn't fully understand the impact of what he did on me. He said, "When you started asking questions about my spending, I panicked. I knew you were right, and I knew it meant I was going to get caught eventually. So instead of just admitting it, I made it about you being jealous so that when it all fell apart, I could hide behind the narrative that it wasn't about the fraud. It was about you not understanding entrepreneurship or something." I said, "So you knowingly lied about me to protect yourself?" He said, "Yes, I did. And I've been thinking about that every single day since the bankruptcy became public. I can't undo it, but I'm telling you right now, I know you weren't jealous. I knew you weren't jealous then too. I just needed everyone to think you were so I didn't have to face the fact that I was lying." We talked for another hour. He explained how the debt had spiraled, how each new loan felt like it would be the last one to buy him time, how he was paralyzed by the shame of admitting he'd failed. A lot of it was self-serving explanation, but some of it felt genuine. At the end of it, he asked if we could try to repair the relationship. I told him I needed time and that him understanding what he did was a start, but it wasn't going to immediately make 3 years of manipulation okay. He accepted that. We exchanged numbers. We didn't have each other's actual numbers, which is pretty sad when you think about it. We just stopped communicating entirely, and I told him I'd be willing to get together again in a few months. The interesting thing is, my parents asked me how it went. I told them the truth. Chad acknowledged that he'd lied about my motivations to protect himself, and he apologized. My mom seemed relieved, like maybe now this could be resolved. My dad was more practical and asked if Chad was dealing with the legal stuff okay. Neither of them really acknowledged what Chad's actions meant, which is a bit of a pattern with them. But I've made peace with that. That's on them. Jennifer's been supportive throughout all of this. She thinks I handled it well. She also pointed out that the fact Chad admitted what he did, even if it's been months after the fact, is actually a pretty good sign that maybe our relationship can be salvaged eventually. I'm not there yet, but I'm open to the possibility. The weirdest part of all this is that our extended family still doesn't really understand the full picture. Most people just think Chad failed at business and hid it through fraud, which is true, but they don't think about the layer of personal manipulation that happened in the family specifically. They don't understand that he actively damaged my reputation to protect himself. And honestly, that might be fine. I don't need everyone to fully understand. I just need Chad to understand, and for my parents to understand. The rest is kind of secondary. Anyway, that's the update. Thanks for all the responses and the perspective. It helped to write this all out and have people validate that I wasn't crazy for being concerned about his spending or angry about the manipulation afterward. Final thoughts. Writing this out has been cathartic, but it's also made me realize that the thing I was most angry about wasn't the fraud itself. It was the gaslighting that preceded it. The fraud was Chad's problem and his consequence. But the gaslighting was something he did to me, and that distinction matters. I don't know if Chad will ever fully grasp the impact of what he did to my character and my family relationships during those 3 years. He apologized, which is something. But apologies don't undo 3 years of being seen as the bitter, jealous brother at family gatherings. What I do know is that I was right about his finances, I was right to be concerned, and I was right not to let go of the truth even when it was uncomfortable. And that's something I can live with. The jealousy narrative he created didn't stick because the truth eventually came out. And maybe that's the real lesson here. You can tell a great story, you can make everyone believe it, but if it's built on a foundation of fraud and deception, eventually the whole thing collapses under its own weight. Chad learned that the hard way. I just wish he'd learned it before he spent 3 years damaging my reputation in the process.